Hello, here we are. We're going to cover one more question for young Earth creationists. This question is, where are the waters above? The question comes from Genesis 1:6, which I will read to you here. Um, Genesis 1:6 is day 2. It starts with God said, ends with morning, evening, and morning, second day. Here's what we have. Let there be an expanse in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters. And God made the expanse and separated the waters that were under the expanse from the waters that were above the expanse. And it was so. And God called the expanse heaven. So there you have it. That's how the atmosphere was created. If you take a look at this image here, this is how things look. If you are a flat earth Christian, you you will kind of adhere to this. This is how an ancient Near East person would have viewed the world. The earth is flat down here. There's waters below. The firmament is created here. The star, sun, and moon are embedded in it. It's actually, interestingly enough, the firmament is very hard. Job tells us, asks us, can you, like him, spread out the skies hard as a cast metal mirror? So Job is acknowledging that the skies are covered with a uh, something as hard as a beaten out iron, something that's hard as an iron mirror. So if you work for NASA and you want to launch satellites into space, you have to consider this in your design. All right, because this is how the Bible, if you're a young earth creationist, this is how the Bible describes the world. All right, but from a scientific standpoint, is that what the world is like? So we're going to look at an example of how a young earth creationist handles this topic. This is on Answers in Genesis. This is Dr. Danny Faulkner, and he addresses this issue, comes down to agrees that the fact that this is how ancient people viewed uh, what the expanse was like, transparent celestial sphere to which the astronomical bodies, the sun, moon, and stars, were attached. He warns us that mistranslation is a cautionary tale to we shouldn't impose our understanding of cosmology onto the Bible. Kudos for that. And then he discusses how some people have dealt with this problem before. One theory people have had is that the waters above did exist and they were destroyed in the flood. That's when God opened the floodgates here. These doors to heaven were opened up and all the water above drained out. The canopy over the earth was collapsed. There was never any evidence or any reason to believe that. That's what I was taught as a child in church. The problem with that, and to his credit, he points out that the problem with that is that the waters are still referenced in the Bible. Right here, the problem with the canopy theory is that later in the Bible, Psalm 148:4, for example, the waters above are still there. So that doesn't make sense to say that the flood, um, is when the waters above were broken. And again, to his credit, and I want to point out here that the respect for, like, for the passage itself is evident here, because it very clearly says that there's a firmament, there's waters above the firmament. And the second objection that he raises is to the hydrologic cycle. That's what that's referring to. It's just talking about water in the sky, clouds, and how it rains. But that's water in the firmament. That's not water above the firmament. So that very good. He's on the right track, I believe, here. And then here's where I think we have a problem. And the problem is because now if you read the Bible this way, if you're expecting it, you're not happy enough for it to be true in the sense that the author intends it. You need it to be true in a scientific sense. And now this author has to find some water somewhere, and it has to be above the earth. And we've been there. There is no water above the earth. So where does he go? He has to keep going, traveling through the universe until he gets to the edge of the universe and concludes that's where the firmament must end. That's where the firmament must have been pushed. The water that was separated from the water of the sea must have pushed all the way to the end of the universe. That the shell of the water is surrounding the entire universe, which is very convenient because now you've pushed it outside of the realm of science and you can kind of stay with what you have. I find that pretty much a waste of time, and it's a sad thing because you could just be happy with the truth that's there. And what I want to say is this doesn't exist. This is not how the earth is. There are no waters above.
No. No. I have no son.
So I'm sorry to say that, but that doesn't mean I'm saying the Bible's not true. There just are not any waters above. And so before I go any further, I am going to into how we should interpret this passage. I'm going to find for you another passage, if I can, and walk you through what you probably, so if you are a flat earth Christian, you're extremely consistent. And you'll look at Matthew 5:45, and the topic certainly isn't about what the shape of the universe is. And I would say that's true for Genesis 1 as well. The topic is something different, but there's a reference to the sun made here. And Matthew 5:45 says this, so that you may be sons of your Father who is in heaven. For he makes his sun rise on the evil and on the good. So what do you learn from this passage about the sun? The sun rises, and it for everyone, evil and good, which is the point we should be getting from this passage. But you can't just discard the fact that he says the sun rises. And if you've read the passage, if you've watched my video on accommodations, this is what's happening here, and it's one that you're in on, so you accept it. Well, we know the sun doesn't rise. We go on. We know he's talking about the phenomenological way we perceive the sun, and we're in on the exact same perception that ancient people were in on. So we have one hermeneutic for this passage. We know it's an accommodation. The sun doesn't actually rise, and we move on fine. However, when we get here, we're unwilling to just make the same accommodation because we're not in on it. This is how ancient people viewed the world. We don't understand it. It's not how we view the world. So we can't read the passage the same way we would the same accommodation or that we would grant to Matthew 5:45. We can't grant that here. And if you're someone who's looking for some kind of scientific explanation of the world, and you can't find water, you got to go and search the entire universe. You don't find it in the entire universe, then it must be on the outside of the universe. And you can see this is now you've lost the meaning of the passage. You've lost the purpose of God. What God's trying to create here is something very simple. It's what he's trying to communicate here, is something very simple. It's the atmosphere that we live in, the space that God gave us to live. in the same way that you know that the sun doesn't actually rise in Matthew 5:45, you should know that there aren't any actual waters above. You don't have to go searching the universe to find the waters. So the simple answer to the question, where are the waters above, is that there are no waters above. In the same way, in a scientific sense, in the same way there is no sunrise or there are no falling stars. We don't need to look for the waters above. It's simply not a scientific statement. If you read about the waters above in the textbook, it would be an error. If you read about waters above in ancient literature, then you understand it's an accommodation of the way that people perceived things. If you go in the future, and you might say, well, that is just wrong. It's not wrong. It's simple accommodation to the way people perceived the world. And just because you don't understand how they perceive the world because you don't perceive it that way. I want to tell you that if you go 1,000 years, or I don't know, 10,000 years in the future, and people are living in space and they're reading scripture, and if they do go 10,000 years and we're in space, scripture will still be there. They'll read the Bible, and they'll read your literature referring to sunrise, and they won't understand, and people will be tempted to say it's an error because we must not have understood that the sun didn't rise, right? Because they won't be in on it. It's not a perception they have. They don't look at the sun and see it rising above the horizon and then setting on the other side. They would look at it from a totally different perception, the same way that they perceived waters above. We don't perceive it that way, so we don't need to find waters above. It's the exact same thing. And if you object to that, I would question why aren't you go all in and be a flat earth Christian? Because Matthew 5:45 tells us that God causes the sun to rise. So if you don't believe Matthew 5:45 and if you insist on reading that in an unscientific manner, then why do you do the same thing here? Why not just be consistent and go all in and adopt this view of the world? Okay.